everyone, this is Marie of Living Felt, and welcome back to part 5 of our doll felt along. I have seen some of you checking in already, and I'm so excited to share today with you. Today we are wet felting clothes for our dolls, and I know a lot of people have already finished and some people are waiting to wet felt some final piece. So thank you all so much for being here. And if you've stumbled across this feed just by chance, oh, my phone's up. If you've stumbled across this feed just by chance or you're just jumping in, we have been doing a doll felt along for needle felting a doll over the last 5 weeks. This is week 5. And if you're watching the playback on YouTube, make sure to subscribe so you can check out all of our videos. We do a weekly live show on Wednesdays at 2. And we have been doing these felt alongs. So we're just wrapping up the doll felt along today. And thank you everybody for being here and just helping to make this happen. Over the last 5 weeks, it's been such a treat for me to see all of your dolls coming to life. The range of personalities and characters and expressions are just amazing. And some people are making like multiple dolls, and that's super, super fun. So I'm gonna say hi to a few people. I see a number of you are here with us already. And I see here's Kate, Barb, Maria, Connie, Kareen. Oh, hi, all the hearts. I'm going to heart you guys too. Thank you so much for being here. And I would love to see some of your comments pop up on what you're wanting to wet felt for your doll. I saw a few of you have already chimed in on what you want to make. And I promise we're going to look at as much as we can together. And we're going to wet felt one piece. So my goal today is to give you some concepts that you can work with, a few different ways you might approach clothing your dolls if you want to wet felt a portion, and some different ways you might just go about making that happen. Today we are going to use wool plus embellishment fibers. We're not going to nano felt our piece. What I want to do is show you maybe a few ways that if you're just beginning to wet felt or you haven't wet felted at all, how you might approach it so you can start to leverage some of the texture and flexibility you can get from wet felting, which is a lot more than you can get from just needle felting. So I see here, Kathy says like a flowing tunic shirt. I saw someone else wanted to make pants. Someone else said they wanted to make a vest. Actually, I want to show you, before the time is over, I want to show you the smallest pair of pants I've ever felted. So I'll grab that somewhere in the middle. But how to make a coat with sleeves. So here's what I've done in preparation for today. For the 2 dolls that I've been felting along with you, some of you who've been on this journey with me week after week know that somewhere in the middle there, when I was working on 2 of the dolls, I decided they looked like a couple, and I decided to turn them into Mrs. and Mr. Claus. So I wet felted underwear for my Granny Claus and a little red dress that needs a lot of embellishment, but I just made her a plain red dress. I did my best to capture that on video so that I can add it along with the video files after the live feed. But because so many of you want to make either like a jacket or a vest or a skirt, I'm going to use that as a model today for wet felting, and it's not going to be for either one of my characters. It's just going to be how you might approach that. And I'm going to show you a number of things you can look at. Jacket, skirt and top, coat with sleeves. Look, these are going to be really easy. So everybody who wants to make something with sleeves, both my underwear and my dress for Santa are going to contribute to that a little bit. And what I'm going to show you is that, making something like a dress, a sleeveless dress, a sleeveless vest, and a skirt can all be made very similarly. So she's wearing a little sample skirt that I made for my great big So Boho skirt. And so this was just made as a test model before wet felting my large one. And once you get into nano felting, you can really add a lot of texture. Now we're not going to go this far today. We'll nano felt together later on in the year. But I just want to sort of whet your palate for really delving into wet felting and exploring textures and nano felting as well, because that's really, really fun. Okay, someone says the boots that Stash has, overalls, stripy tights. Oh, I have to unplug the scale. Hold on. My scale is talking to me today. Stripy tights. You know, I've never made tights that fit, but you could definitely make them like pants with footies. A coat with sleeves, boots like Stash. Okay, so boots, Stash and Jax's outfits are both some of the places where I want to start with you. I didn't capture a lot of photos when I was making them. As I said, I was just making them for me. But I do want to share with you how they were made and let you know that you can absolutely do this, because they're sort of faked. They're kind of faked clothing. So Stash and Jax both have clothing that are just, they're kind of like faux clothing. And I'm going to show you how I made Stash's tunic and Jax's clothes as well. But this tunic here was just made as one long rectangle. And his head was not on his body when it was put on, which is one of the reasons I do the heads last. And it just sits right over his body, and I hand stitched the sides. And then his sleeves were also made in a real long strip and then actually stitched to his arm. So there's a running stitch right in here. And his clothes are nano felted. But his boots are made with our MC1 batting. This is our willow with some pecan and, you know, dark chocolate and some other fibers on top. And literally they were just pre-felted, so lightly felted, just like his hat, and then cut into strips, wrapped around his leg, and needle felted into place. So if you can wet felt just straight strips of fabric, you can do stuff like this, stuff like this, and stuff like this. That's all I did, was make straight strips of fabric. Greta says, what is nano felting? It's nano, some people say nuno, N-U-N-O. And nano felting is when you bind the fiber to some kind of fabric. Usually we use some kind of open weave fabric. You could use cheesecloth. Very often we use like a nice silk gauze. Now we have this lovely Uzbek silk, which is lovely to work with as well. And so the outside of his garment is wool and other fibers, and the inside is a silk fabric that was hand dyed. And it allows you to create a nice lightweight drapey piece. Okay. Great, Kate is answering. Okay, good. Now Jax's clothing is very similar. It's been felted in pieces and then wrapped around and pieced onto his body. So it looks like he's wearing a top, but actually the fabric that I made is needle felted to his body here and here, here and here, and otherwise wrapped, layers of wrapping. And the same with his boots. His boots are like very similar, but just made with a lot more texture. And they were lightly felted and then wrapped around his leg. So if you can felt something that's just a straight strip, then you can make clothing like this that just gets wrapped around the body. And just to help you visualize how these were made, I have a couple of snapshots from the clothing when I made them for Jax and Stash. Cool? All right. So what I'm going to do is show you those pictures, and then we might jump back and forth just a little bit before we start wet felting, so I can show you some of the patterns that I made for some of the dolls that are in the room. Let me show you Witchy again real quick, because we'll look at her clothing and how it was made. So her hat was wet felted. And it's meant to be ratty, oh, by the way. And it's actually needle felted to her head. That's how it stays on, is I just soft felted it and needle felted it to her head. Her skirt was wet felted with just some like little bits of tattered silk fabric in the mix, and then her boots were wet felted, and then they were kind of tied on to make them look like they're wrapped, but they were like boots that were just way too big for her. Actually, those show. And so wet felting really does give you a lot of room to explore. Great. Okay. It's so lovely to have you all here. And for everyone watching the playback, lovely to have you watching back too. It's been really fun for me to felt along with y'all live. So I'm going to cue us up here and show you just a couple of pictures. This picture that you're looking at right here is Stash's tunic being felted. So the blue thing is just a pool cover. It's like our super bubble, but not quite as rigid as our super bubble. That's what I used to have. And then there is a layer of silk fabric that's hand dyed laying on the base. And then a whole bunch of wool, locks, textural fibers, but laid out very, very thin. So wherever you can see the blue bubble underneath, that's just the silk fabric showing what's underneath. So it's like bare silk fabric. So there are parts that I really did leave bare. And basically, I wet felted this thing, shrunk it down, and cut a head hole in it, and I did nothing else other than cut a head hole in this piece of fabric. And let me show you his sleeves. These were his sleeves being laid out and felted, and his belt. So he's wearing a belt, which is the skinny part on top, and the sleeves are those long strips of fabric. Those are, I think that was a 4-foot table I'm working on, so those things are over 3 feet long. It shrunk a lot. It shrunk even more than I thought they would, but each one of those became his sleeves. Linda says, I don't know if this is live or a video. Hi, Linda, this is live. Deborah says, what's the size? I don't know what you're asking the size of. I didn't write down the measurements of this when I made it, but I think that's a 4-foot table there that I was working on. Someone says, did I felt around the neck hole after I cut it? And I don't remember. I did a wrap around his neck, but it's very, very thin. So the thing I want to say about if you endeavor to nanofelt is wherever you're going to cut, I encourage you to have a wool trim. I've definitely wet felted things that I needed to cut and wished I had wool where I had to cut. So wherever you think you're going to cut, I would have a nice layer of wool so you're not just cutting the silk. That's just like one hot tip. Okay, great. And now I'm going to show you Jax's clothes being made, just to give you a concept that you can make pieces and parts. So there he is on the day that I was working with him, and you can see back there I'm making some leaves and some stuff. Let me jump to it, a little bit better picture. So that top image there is the layout of fabric for his boots. And what I did was basically make a great big patch of just fabric with the MC1 and embellishment fibers over the top so that I could cut strips to wrap his boots. And when I make the boots, and I'll show you again now that you've had a chance to look at this, one of the things I like to do is have an organic edge at least on one side of anything that's being wrapped. And that organic edge just makes it look a little more natural as it's wrapping around. And then what you see along the bottom are just some leaves and such, and off to the right bottom there is actually what his little shirt is made from, just those little pieces. And then I have some extra silk there. So let me turn back up for a second so you can just look at the boots one more time and maybe see a little of what I was saying about having one natural edge. So when I make the boots, one edge might be cut the hidden edge is cut, and then I like to use the more organic edge as the trailing edge when you're wrapping them around. And when you're doing, you know, fairies and elemental beings, wrapping and thinking of leaves and bark and stuff like that for clothing just works really well. And you have a lot of room to play in here, and just have fun with it. And then I went back and put the dark brown underneath each layer. Somehow it just added a little more to the boots and made them feel a little more fun. So you can absolutely do that. Now, someone asked about his neckline, and I hand stitched a neckline on from one of the long pieces that I made, what would have been his belt, I guess. I added this sort of faux neck and sewed it on there because I didn't really like how it looked. But you can see here that the sleeves are just turned up, and that the sides of his tunic here are just hand stitched together. And you can absolutely do something like that, and just no one's ever questioned his clothing, but it's just so fun because you can get so much texture in what you're doing. So I'm going to see if y'all have any questions before I show you something else. I lost my place. Let me go back so I can read your questions. So let me turn down. Oh, do y'all have any questions about the witch before I turn back down? I know that some of y'all said that you're going to make a witch, and I'm going to show you the resists that I used. Are y'all having trouble hearing me? I know I have my microphone. I can move my microphone a little bit. If you're having trouble hearing me, please let me know. Sorry that if I'm not speaking loud enough. So I'm sorry if it seems quiet. I have my microphone turned all the way up, and I'm just going to, go ahead and turn it up a little bit. So I'm sorry about that, y'all, if it's hard to hear me. Is that better? Would you give me a thumbs up? I have it all the way turned up. So if you can hear me better now, just let me know. I've moved my microphone. Oh, okay. And I'm going to be at the table here in just a second, so we should be good after that. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to show you. I'm just going to do a little refresher on, besides making long rectangles like I showed you for Stash and Jax's clothes. Just a couple of other things that you can think about if you want real toe in the water, real safe way to make something by just making a flat piece. I'm going to turn down the desktop, and then we're going to look at a number of patterns and things that you might consider. And I'll show you Granny's clothes too that I made. Okay, so this is right here. This is just a reminder of a couple of things you can consider for making clothes from just flat pieces of fabric. So we had the tunic for Stash, which was basically a long rectangle, and then I just cut a little head hole and basically sewed it onto his body right here. I didn't even cut armholes. I just rolled the fabric up because it shrunk so much. So that is an option, is just to make flat rectangles and then cut the shapes that you want. Also, for those of you who missed the needle felting portion, same for making something like a vest, except this is, when you make a vest, it's difficult because you need to have the sleeve attachment. So we're going to look at that today. This works great as a little jacket. You can put both of your doll's arms through there and just wrap it around, and it looks like a little jacket with a turned back collar. And we showed that in the last video on a little dolly I have. So if y'all didn't see that, I can get it again. And maybe even just making a skirt. You can make a skirt in the same way. Just make a big piece of fabric and then cut out your circle as big as you need it, and then cut a little hole and put it on your doll just like this. And you can even needle felt it into place. Now, but you can also wet felt over resist, and that's what we're gonna be looking at today, is wet felting over resist, so that you can work a little smaller in one place, and then even just have a little more flexibility. So let's see here. I want to find something for you. These are some of the things that I used for Witchy. And I think I used this for Witchy. I've changed my dress pattern a little bit. But these are the things that I made for my little Witchy doll. And these are her boots. They were pointy. They were way too big for her. The fiber that I used didn't shrink very much. And so we're going to talk about fiber choice a little bit today when you're felting so small. But this was her hat, did pretty well. And this was her dress, which was way too big. It was just way too big for her in so many ways. So I ended up just cutting it into a skirt and piecing it on her. And that's one thing that's really nice, is you kind of have that flexibility. You can just chop it up and decide to do something different. So Terry says the witch's boots, and I know y'all a little bit behind me. Yeah, these are the witch's boots. And here's another little pair of boots. So this is no different. These weren't made on this resist, but these are no different than our current slipper and boot pattern for felting over resist. They're just done really small. These would probably fit my current Santa, or even my current Santa grandma. But you can make little things like this, and they're just so much fun. These are super thick, and I made them, quite honestly, a good 10 years ago when I didn't have as much felting experience as I had today, so I would probably make them a lot thinner. But they're really thick, and they would get him through the snow, at least to check the mail, I think. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be tossing some of this stuff down, and I want to show you, I'm going to show you one more little dress, and let's talk a little bit about how we size these things. It's really a lot different than when you're sizing for human clothing, because there's so many real measurements you need to take for human clothing. And for my little dolls, I kind of wing it a lot and just kind of go for it. And you might try that too initially, and that's one of the reasons I made the underwear, so I can kind of show you how you might approach that. This little dress was made for the little redhead doll that I've shared with y'all a couple of times. And when you're trying to figure out how big of a dress to make, I encourage you to get out your quilt squares and make a little dress that will fit your doll's body. And let this be your pattern so that then you can make a resist. Now I would change the way this is shaped, and I'm going to show you how the one is that I made today. But this is the actual resist that I used to make this little dress. And I think finally this year I'll finally put the dress on my dolly. It's just a little nano felt dress, loosely pieced together and very soft felted. This is a thrift store silk that I cut up, and I wet felted, and this is another layer of silk. I wet felted merino top and other bling fibers over it, right over this resist, and then just cut a little neck hole. But because it's like a little flower fairy, I left the bottom loose and ratty, and I left the sleeves loose as well. So I want to see if y'all have any questions on that. I'm going to scroll down and before I jump ahead too much further. The comments I'm seeing still say boots, so I want to be in tune with you all. So remember, this is just the stage. Pattern, make a pattern. You don't have to sew it on your doll to know that it's going to fit or that's the size you need. And then we have to figure out how big the resist needs to be. And then we shrink our little dress. So my little dress is, about the size of this. When we make a pattern like this, even if it's shaped differently, you usually want the sleeves to be longer than you want the finished garment to be. You want the bottom to be longer than you want the finished garment to be. And that's going to allow your wool to stop there and your felting to stop there. Or if you're using fabric and stuff, it can just trail off the edge. Someone asked, can you use a silk hanky as the silk in nanofelting? And the answer to that, Terry, is no. Think of a silk hanky as an embellishment fiber. It doesn't have integrity on its own. Nanofelting allows you to bind fiber to a fabric that already has some integrity. And silk hankies, I did bring one to felt with today, doesn't have any integrity on its own. It's like a sticky spider web thing. So when you're nanofelting, you're really felting usually to a woven fabric. Okay, I'm trying to read. Thank you for answering for me, Kate. Yes, Linda, I have a boo-boo. Okay, so when you're making a resist, remember the sleeves ideally should be longer than you want the finished garment to be, and the bottom should be longer than you want the finished garment to be. This is going to help you a lot. If you were nanofelting, you would lay the fabric down first, and you want the fabric to be wider than the piece so it can at least wrap around one side, and that's going to keep you from having gaping holes. So if you endeavor to nanofelt, even if you've never done it before, when you cut your silk fabric, let the fabric extend beyond this enough so that it would wrap up. You could lay it down and it would wrap up over, and then you'll put your other piece of silk on top. So someone says, is it a silk scarf you look out for in the thrift shop or charity shop? Yes, I buy lots of silk in the thrift shop because you can get some fun prints and stuff. So let's see, like this could even be, if you wanted to just use this, you could cover it with a solid piece of silk and just wool on one side, and then you could have a fun little patterned dress. So this was just a silk scarf from the thrift shop. And you know what? Just remember to experiment with it first and see, does it felt? So remember, when you nanofelt, use cold water, take your time, and give the fibers time to migrate. This is just a super soft felted little dress, and it's a quickie way you can make something and get some fun texture with it. But today we're going to work with 100% wool. Before we jump to that, let's talk a little bit about sizing. Someone says, will it shrink more vertically than horizontally? You know, plan for it to shrink. It does depend on how you lay out your fiber. It really depends on how you lay out your fiber. So in the recent nanofelt wearables workshop I took with Charity Vandermeer, which was just amazing, we laid our fiber out in a crosshatch pattern. We're not going to do that today, but we shrunk ours about 50% this way and 30% this way. So it really depends on how you lay out your fibers and the shrinkage rate of your fibers. So you really do need to test, and I'm going to give you an idea of how you might test the fibers that you have, how much you felt, you know, and how you work by making underwear for your doll. So it's just an idea. Let's look at my granny doll. She is still in the works. I just got her hands on her, and she's got some breasts in place. And this is who's going to be my Mrs. Claus. And what I did for her was I wanted to make her some underwear that would be like bloomers. I'm going to run a little thread through here. I wanted to have time to do it before we got together, but this goes on her body, and I'm going to run a little thread through here so that it cinches down to her legs. And I cut the back open here so that I can get it on her body. Because something like this is not as easy to slip over the head like a dress or something else like that. So these are her little bloomers, if you will, but it's like a full little undies, or you could stop it even here at the waist. And someone asked earlier, how do you know how to size for your dolls? If your dolls are all the same, start building a little pattern library, or if they're similar, build a pattern library and then just make adjustments off the patterns that you make. If they're not all the same, you're going to be winging it a little bit, because dolls are not quite as easy to measure as a human. As a human, we're going to measure things like how wide are the shoulders, how wide at the breast, how wide at the waist, how wide at the hips, how far down to the armhole, how far down to the breast, how far down to the waist, how far down to the hips, and how far down to the hem. We have on our website what's called the Wet Felting Shrinkage Pattern Calculator or tool. If you use Microsoft Excel, you may find that valuable. If you don't, that may be a little intimidating, but there's a table in the front where you can just plug in your desired measurements and use an estimated shrinkage to calculate how much something is how big your pattern needs to be. So I'm just going to give you, a high point, sort of like a quickie idea of how this works. And I measured my little dolly here. Her widest point around here is about 9.5, let's say 9.5 inches. And I wanted her underwear to be very fitted to her body so that I can put her dress on top. I hope. I haven't tried her dress on yet. I was waiting for you guys. So I hope her dress fits. Okay. So here it goes. So she's about 9 3/4, 10 inches around. And I wanted those underwear to be a really tight fit. So let's say, because I know my little undies will stretch, that if I want my desired measurement to be 10 inches, I have to estimate a shrinkage amount. You could shrink something 50%, 40%, 35%. I went with like a 35% shrinkage rate because I know I wasn't going to felt this rock hard and I wanted it to have some give. And honestly, it's just a little pair of underwear, so I wasn't overly concerned about it. So how you get the resist measurement, the size of this thing that you want to make, is you take your desired measurement, your 10 inches, and you divide it by 1 minus the estimated shrinkage rate. It's so easy. So in this case, we're only going to be making, the measurement only goes one side. So if you say that's 65%, 10 divided by 65% equals 15.38 inches. And I always round up to like a quarter of an inch, the next quarter of an inch. So equals 15.5 inches. 15.5 inches divided by 2 is like 7.75. Isn't that right? So 15.5 divided by 2 is 7 equals, so then you divide this by 2 equals 7.75. So at the widest point of my pattern, I want it to be about 7.75 so I can get it over her hips and her derriere. And I made her little underwear with the merino short fiber bats because they felt so quickly, and they're great for small areas because the fibers are super short. When you're working with something like merino top that's really long, I have found that when you're doing super narrow areas like this, because the fiber staple length itself might wrap all the way around, you don't get the shrinkage or the interlocking that you might want. So it's better to cut it, and that's why I made this with the bats. So let me put this on her to get started, and then see, is everyone, feel free to ask me questions. Rhonda says shrinkage rate can also be affected by rubbing and rolling, and yes, that's true. Yes, especially when you're spot fulling, it absolutely does affect that. And the more you wet felt, the more you start to control each of those parameters. The amount you're rolling, the way you're laying out your fiber, the types of fiber you're using, etc. So here we are with Granny's underwear, and I'll tie them on later. Just tie them on to the legs. You don't have to finish your doll underneath if you don't want to, what's going to be under the clothes. I just thought underwear would be kind of fun for her if, her skirt got lifted up, you could see. And her head is still not on because I made her a dress. And this doesn't fit her as well in the, the breast as you might like. So what you can do, like I said, if you wanted, you could just make them underwear like bloomers. You could cut them off right here and even give her a drawstring or stitch them to her body. Okay, so what I'm going to do with her is just give her a little, I don't know, I might make it fun and give her a little red thread snaking up the back, and then I'm going to tie it right here. And let's see what y'all are saying. Now, here's the dress I made her, and it's the reason why I wait for the head to go on last. After making her underwear, which is a great way to test how is your pattern for the shape of your doll, I didn't love how low the armholes were. So we'll see how I did. With her dress, I just made an adjustment off of this same template. So here's her little dress that I made. She's like wearing a house dress, so I definitely want to add some stitching, and I think I'm going to give her a white apron over the top ultimately. And I think that probably these underwear won't go great with these sleeves, but while we're all together, I'll put it on so you can see just how you kind of find your way as you're working. This is the pattern I used to make her dress, and it was just an adjustment off of this one. So I decided to make the armholes come in just a little bit more, and the skirt come out further and longer. And so just for fun, let's put it on her and see how I did, because I have no idea. I really honestly have not put it on her. And I cut her little head hole. It looks like it's probably a little off center, so that means I'll probably have to go back and recenter it. I did felt it after, and neither side is front or back. I have no idea. So I'm just going to put it on her. And I'll let y'all ask me any questions. Oh, this is the, I think we call it garnet. I'll have to see what it is in the short fiber bats. I'll have to see what we call that color. So here we go. This is how fun it is. And it's another reason it helps to have the pieces and parts well felted, because it definitely roughs them up putting clothes off and on. It might be easier just to pull it over her head first, but we'll see. We'll see if I can get her arms through these little holes. I don't know. And you don't want to overbend them too much either, that's for sure. So maybe I'll just pull it on first and see if I can get her. This is how it will fit her once I can get her arms out. So that's what I got to do, is get her arms through these holes. It's tricksy making such a full dress, that's for sure. Let me see, what questions do y'all have? Okay, everyone's asking about the dress. I'm just going to get her little hands through here first. Here we go. There's one. I'm not very experienced dressing dollies. People who make Barbie clothes are just laughing right now. Usually I piece the clothing on. It's like one of my favorite things to do, is to, piece the clothing as you go. But you can see why putting the head on last gives you a lot more room to play, because then you can make the dress more fitted, and the dolls' heads are so big that you would have to give them openings and closures if you didn't do that. So I wanted this to seem like kind of a house dress, like she's just around the house making cookies, and I think this is a little better fit than she had before. And probably what I will do is give her, like I said, an apron, and I might even shorten the dress a little bit, and you can cut it and wet felt it some more. So this is how she'll look. Some of y'all I know didn't catch us last time when we put the head on the body, but that is in part 4. And yeah, so it fits her a little bit. It fits her a little bit better. It definitely needs some work and some tuning. I could even make the neckline lower if I want. But I wanted to show you that what I did was start with the underwear and see how that fit, and then I made some adjustments to my pattern, and mostly that was to make the skirt fuller and to bring this in a little bit so that it fits her underarms a little bit better. If you're making something sleeveless, it's a lot easier because you don't have to worry about that fit. And oh, by the way, on human garments, it's one of the reasons people so rarely teach sleeved garments in classes, because this is a hard area to deal with the bulk and get right. And I think a lot of people have challenges with it, and it's why you don't see a lot of classes with sleeved garments. So when you do, notice how well they fit under here, because you want to take from that teacher who really has that mastered. Okay. Marjolaine says she struggles more with clothes for your boy characters. Marjolaine, do you mean coming up with the clothes or just making them in general? I'm going to put Granny aside, and I'm going to finish her after we're not together and show you this very simple pattern, which is like a slice of the dress. And this is the style pattern that you can use for making a sleeveless dress, a tunic, a vest, or a skirt. That's really all. This basic style of pattern will make a skirt, a vest, a tunic, or a sleeveless dress. So you can make the sleeveless dress without the arms like I showed you, and just cut your armholes once you have it figured out for your doll. Stephanie says, are you going to lay out the short bat over your resist? Yes, and that is what we're going to do. So if I'm going to pull the wet felting materials, if you have any other questions, please queue them up, and I will do my best to address them before we actually start wet felting, which we're going to start to do just now. Okay, so I'm going to get set up and tell you what I have set up, and then I'm going to look for your questions. So for those who are brand new to wet felting and have never wet felted before, there's tons of ways to set up. This is one of the ways I like to set up, especially for something small. The first thing is I just put down a grippy shelf liner so that my work surface doesn't move around a bunch. The next thing is I usually work in something like this, which is a boot tray that I bought at the hardware store. You might find something at Target if you have one of those stores, or a Walmart type store, general department store, you know, $10 or less. I paid $2 for this thing now, I don't know, 10 or more years ago. So it's really inexpensive. I put the grippy shelf liner down here also so that I don't slide around in the tray. We're working with what is our super bubble we sell in the shop. You can use bubble wrap if that's what you have, or even just the grippy shelf liner. We're using our olive oil soap, which is nice, hard milled soap. It doesn't suds a bunch, but it really helps glue your fibers together while you're wetting them. I'm wetting out with a sponge, which some of you know is one of my favorites. This is our bamboo mat. Today I'm using it as a core, and as opposed to a bed to roll on. A couple of layers of mesh. I work with a layer on the top and the bottom. A quilt square, which you'll see I like to roll the project in and hold it all together. A towel, of course, and some hot water I have right over here. It's basically lukewarm at this point. Okay. And I'm just going to peek in here at some of your questions before I actually get started and see if there's anything I can answer for you. Marjolaine says Kathy says, can you still needle felt areas of the wet felt to the body? Yes, if it's soft felted, you'd be surprised. You really can. You can needle felt them to the body, or you could even stitch them to the body. So before I move on, I'll show you Witchy here. So her top is our MC1 batting, but her skirt is just needle felted to her body, and that's wool and silk. So I needle felted that to her body, and then I sort of put her top over the top. And it's fun because then you can also get little wrinkles in it too, as long as it's kind of lightweight. So that's pretty easy to do. Yep. And the same with, I showed you on Stash's boots and Jax's boots. So Christy says, does it matter what kind of soap is used? You know, Christy, almost every felt maker is going to tell you something different. For me, I like one that isn't fragranced with a bunch of fragrance. Like most dish soap is fragranced. You want something that has a real slickness to it. It's nice if it's not very sudsy, because when your soap is sudsy, like most dish soaps, they add a bunch of air and actually cause the fibers to float apart. So I suggest a nice hard milled soap that won't melt away the first time you use it. I've felted with lovely goat's milk soaps and things that are, you know, handmade, but if it's not hard milled, it tends to melt away really fast. So use something that you can just dry in between uses. Okay. I'm reading. Kate says, I love how you always say, a towel. I always have multiple hand towels next to my tray, a big towel over my lap, and a few others nearby. You know what, Kate? I've learned to actually felt with less water. Terry says, I almost use too much water. How do you know when enough is enough? You know what? Here's what I like to say is, you don't want your project floating in a puddle of water. One thing that's nice about these two surfaces, the Super Bubble and this, is they're both raised surfaces and allow the water to kind of run down to the tray. And if you have a puddle of water in your tray, drain it off. You can have a good amount of water in, like, say, your stage 1 and stage 2 of getting the fibers to come together. But after that, you don't want it sitting in a puddle, because then the fibers also tend to float away from each other. And whoever said they want to make trousers, I'm going to remind me at the end, and I'll pull the smallest pair of trousers I made. And just remember the underwear. You know, make underwear at least once and then start to adjust your template to make trousers. So I'm going to make something completely different than is for my two Santa figures. We're working with the short fiber bat. This is Kiwi. I have no idea who this is for. And for those of you who've not worked with it before, it's a nice 19 micron short fiber merino. It's actually been cut, to tell you the truth. And what's nice about that is, it, like our MC1 batting, you can get a real short staple length. But this is super fine and felts so fast that when you're doing something like this so small, I think you're going to get a lot of satisfaction from it. So to make small clothing, you don't need a lot of fiber, and really, you know, the more fiber you have, the less shrinkage you get. So start somewhere, weigh it. This is, I don't know, maybe a half ounce, probably more than we need. But let's make like a little vest. You could turn this into a vest or tunic or a sleeveless dress. This is just like a thin foam product. We have a thicker, this is the resist that we sell at the shop. It's a little bit thicker, and if you're new to felting, it's a little bit easier to feel. So this is the resist we sell at the shop, and you can also use bubble wrap, which we're selling now as a pattern material. Yeah, this is the same item, it's just thinner. Okay, so with the short fiber bats, if you've worked with our MC1, another thing about them is you can kind of, you know, separate their thickness. And you can work in single layers, and you can vary the direction if you want. Honestly, you don't have to, but for good practice, I'll do it today and just kind of show you. So what I like to do, I have my resist. I like to sort of get my fiber basically prepped so that it's about the size of my resist. We're going to felt around this. But I want it to be a little bit shorter because I'm making a vest, and I always want it to be a little bit longer because we're going to encase this material in felted wool. So we're going to encase these three sides and leave this side uncovered and cut it. So I'm going to lay down my first layer. I'm going to take off just a little of the bottom. I'm going to lay down my first layer is kind of going this way. You can see the grain when you're looking at it. And the second layer I'm going to make kind of going this way. Like I said, honestly, you don't even have to do that. But for good practice, and especially for those who are new and might be working with different types of fibers, I wanted to do that with you today. And let y'all just bubble up any questions you have. Doris says she's making 359 boxes for her soap. Doris, do you make handmade soap? That seems neat. Okay, so this is just a nice little thin layer. It feels a little bare there. So one thing I always do after I lay out my layer is I put my hands over the whole thing and I feel if there are any bare spots. And if they are, just fill them in with fiber. Little thin bits, just fill them in. We'll make a nice little top decoration too. Fun. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is actually wet and soap this. I don't make a soap solution. I just take my soap, I put it in my water, I take my sponge, I soap up my sponge. And then I'm going to wet this. Now this is one way to do it. You could have the resist underneath as well, but I'm just going to show you this way because it's kind of easy. So I'm just going to get all the water down there. I'm going to put my resist on top. Remember, I want this wool to be a little bit shorter, and I'm just going to kind of press all that water down. If you've never wet felted before and you're watching this now live, let me just see a heart from you. Notice how the area where the resist is wet. Everywhere there's wet, that is absolutely what I want. I want all of that area under there wet and not dry. So be willing to lift it up and have a little peek. And then remember, we put our mesh down. We put one layer of mesh. I love using the mesh to help me wrap the fiber back around the resist. So just use that to help hug it and then press it down with your hand. Up here, don't worry about the fold so much. Just, you know, if you have a bunch of bulk, then try and take it out of the corner just by pulling. But if you want, use your mesh. I'd rather not have a fold myself. I rather pull in the bulk at the corners. So rather than have a big fold, I rather kind of just pull that down and stretch it out. It doesn't have to be, you know, smooth as cake icing per se, but you do want it to not have great big folds in it. Is this showing up okay for you all? Everyone's seeing? Right here, it's a little dry, and right here, it's a little thin. One of the things I like to do in this method is to wrap one side around and have the other side just come, you know, as a single layer. We might have some strands wrapping around, but because this is so thin, and I can almost see my resist right through here, I know that my item is going to be shorter than this, but I don't want to have a hole down here. My vest might be this long or this long, whatever you're making. So I'm going to add a little patch of fiber right there. And kind of make sure I go like the same sort of direction. This is a lot less exact than human clothes, oh, by the way. Just give yourself a little room, you know, to experiment and play and have fun with it. And if you're wanting to nano-felt, I suggest using merino top instead of the short fiber bats, because the short fiber bats felt so quickly, they're going to want to felt before they migrate with your fabric. So use merino top if you want to nano felt. This is going to be really thin, but we're going to put some embellishments on top. I'm going to see, are there any questions? Kate says, can you stitch elastic around the waist to have something hold up? Yes, absolutely you can. Absolutely you can stitch. Y'all have fun with this. Use all the tools you already have in your current craft tool bucket and bring it to your felting. Absolutely bring them all together. So now I just have a big piece here. It's a little bigger at the bottom and a little more narrow at the top. So I'm going to lay it on there knowing that some of it's straggling off. And I'm going to just, some of it I'm going to pull off and some of it I'm going to let trail around the other side. Like I'm totally okay with that. So that's going mostly up and down, and this is going to go mostly kind of across. And be willing to piece it in. This stuff is so thin and wispy. We're just doing 2 micro thin layers and then a design layer. And we can go around where our resist is, and remember that if you want to rip fibers off, to use one hand to kind of hold them down and just give them a tug. These are short fibers, so they're going to come off more easily than like a merino top. And just piece all the areas in so that you feel, again, like you have the same uniform thickness that you had on side 1. And I'm just going to pull some of these off, and then some of them I'm just going to let wrap around because they're so thin and wispy, they're not really adding a bunch of bulk. But this short fiber merino bat, if you're brand new to wet felting and you want to make something thin, play with this and see how easily it felts up. Y'all are going to be surprised how fast this felts right here with us now. Doris says, can I use something else besides the bamboo? For a core roller, yes. I just have a bamboo mat around. You can just use a little dowel or anything you can just roll into a little log. It helps to have a little bit of a core. So notice, for those who are brand new, when I wet, I am pressing all the way down. This is not a thick project, so it's easy to wet it all the way through in one press. I'm not patting it. I'm not just dabbing it. I'm actually using the sponge to press soap and water into the project and air out. And for anyone who's felted with me at all, they know, like, oh yeah, I might sound like a broken record. I take my hand at this point and press all the way around so that all that fiber is laying down. And for anything that's trailing over, we're just going to flip our project over now. Someone asked, how soft does the finished short bat felt up? Is it good for things touching the skin? Absolutely. It's 19 microns, absolutely fine and gorgeous. You're going to love how it feels. I wouldn't use it for something like a person's coat, a human's coat, or something like that. Notice we're just taking all those trailing fibers now again back around to the top. Because it is a short fiber, I feel like it has more of a propensity to pill. And I would rather use a long fiber like a merino top for something like a coat. But a nice scarf or a hat, we made hats with it with Kate Kaprowski when she came the beginning of this year. We used our MC1 batting on the inside for stiffness, and we used the short fiber bats on the outside. I think I did mine vice versa. I think I used the MC1 on the outside. But anyway, so it felts up real nicely, and you can even felt it to the MC1. Okay, so look, our little project is all encased, and it's trailing over the bottom here, and that's okay. You know, you can leave it run short. You can scoot this all up and let it be a little more thick and wispy, or you could just let it trail over and cut it later. I'm going to flip it over just so I can trail up the other side too. Bear with me, y'all. I have something in my throat. Hold on one second. sorry, I had to mute myself for a second so I could talk. So someone says my project looks sudsier than theirs does when they usually do it. And how do you know when you have too much soap? I'm not really worried about that amount of soap myself. If you can see soap trails in the very beginning, I'm happy. I want to know that you have enough soap. But this is a low sudsing soap, as you'll see. It's not going to froth and foam up like a dish soap will. So seeing soap trails in the beginning is absolutely acceptable. Okay, we have our design layer on, our 2 layers on right now. Let's add just a little bit of a design layer because I know some of you are brand new to felting. And we have plenty of time to finish this. So like I said, this is not for Mr. or Mrs. Claus. So these are some of the things I brought. Some blue and greenish bamboo, some neps. I think I see some Angelina all webbed in there. And I even brought a hanky for those. It doesn't quite match, but I'm going to use it anyway. This is a hand-dyed silk hanky. I love having a nice variegated hanky. So someone asked earlier, can you use the silk hanky as the silk fabric in your wet felting? And I said no, and here's why. This is what a silk hanky is. This is a whole cluster of gosh knows how many, 20 or so. And when you pull off one hanky, this is what you have, is a sort of spider. This might even still be 2 hankies. This big spider webby mess. See that divide right there? So you can see this is like 2 hankies. Oh, they're so thin. A silk hanky is just a silk cocoon that has been degummed and then stretched by a human into a square. So see how wispy and, gauzy it is, like gossamer-y? And this is why it doesn't have any integrity all on its own. It's really sticky and it's going to stick to you, so just expect that. And when you make a design layer, you might, if you're going to be cutting it, you might think about where that cut is. You might think about stretching that design layer around to the other side so that you don't have edges without designs on them. You want your design to sort of cross over those edges. So even think a little bit in the diagonal. Kate says they stick to everything. Now, one thing you can do with, a lot of people say that they have a difficult time getting the neps to stick down. And I usually just felt them right into the merino. But one of the things you can do is actually put them underneath a hanky and then let the hanky help hold those down. And this is just a little bit of Angelina in there as well. So I'm just going to kind of stretch these little guys out. I have more. I don't know how long this is going to be, so maybe I should bring them up. Remember, this could be a vest or a dress, but not with sleeves. And the only difference with sleeves is you have to work those little underarms, as I showed you on my underwear. So try underwear first. So just for fun, we're going to just put these underneath the hanky, and you'll be surprised at even how much the hanky kind of disappears. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your lovely comments. And you know what? Just thank you for being here. I want you to know this has just been so fun for me, and I look forward to our next one as well. It definitely gets me to stop procrastinating. This is dyed bamboo, and it's just hand-dyed bamboo. So have fun with bamboo, like just put it out there. Now, I told some of you who know me and have felted with me, after the felting retreat with Charity, one of the rules I had for wet felting with silk is now gone, and that rule was no silk on silk. So that rule is pretty much gone. I learned with her that, silk on silk absolutely works. So have fun with this stuff, and the fun thing about bamboo and silk, bombic silk, tussa silk, even the viscose, whatever you use, is how it kind of scrunches up when you work with it. This is just a little lock, a wool lock. Maybe we put that on the back. I don't know, it's so heavy. I'm going to put it right here, like on one side. This is kind of a coarse lock. I don't even know where I got it. But the thing with locks are, there's usually a natural tapered end and a cut end, and this thing is just like a big glob. So I think I'm going to put it on the back because it's so coarse. I'll show you how to put that on. And if you have some variegated things, have fun with, you know, choosing different parts. I probably didn't bring enough bling. I probably could have brought more. I'm going to just let this stretch across there. Maybe I'll add a little more hanky to the other side. Elsa says, is it bamboo that doesn't felt? And when you think of things that do felt, think primarily of wool. These other fibers, like this Angelina fiber here, the silk, the bamboo, the viscose, technically they don't felt themselves. They don't have the properties of a fiber that felts, but they will bind with the wool. The wool will migrate into them and they'll migrate into the wool. So you do need the wool as a base. And maybe later on a Woolly Wednesday, I'll show you how you can make like a pre-felt with the a faux pre-felt with like the silk. This is going to be where the neck is, but I'm going to put that on anyway. Okay, so let's say this is our design layer. It's not all that blingy. It's not even all that dressy. It's just a little bit of texture. And I'm going to put my mesh right back on top and just mash all that down. Add more soap if you need to. Let's see, is that on my, that's on my mesh. Okay. And now I'm going to flip this over. Alex asked, how did I get into this hobby? And to answer that, I'd like to say I was thinking yesterday that there's a doll that I probably need to felt, and I think it was the last drawing that I drew before I learned about felting. I used to draw, and I draw kind of random random fantasy characters when I drew, and when I saw somebody who needle felted, it was dolls. And I just knew that I wanted to try and make my characters in dolls. So now I do lots of things besides dolls, but this doll felt along is kind of like my full circle, some maybe almost 18 years later, to sort of, I don't know, share kind of how I got started and where I am today too. Okay, so this big piece of lock, maybe it'll end up, you know, kind of trailing off. I'm gonna do that. And where it's joined, see how bulky and dense it is? What it may felt right to it, but what you can do is just take a little patch of wool and let it kind of be an anchor. And it also makes it look like it's not just stuck on there. And you can even add a little bit of interest right in there. So you might add a little bit of green so it doesn't look so continuous, and a little more, even some of your bling. Kind of dress it up. We'll just see how much all this sticks. It's kind of fun to just kind of go for it. There's a little pink thread that I may not want in there, so you can pull that out, or you can try and take it out later. It's all kind of entangled. What other questions do y'all have? I'm going to answer questions because we're going to be done here in just a second. So where these come around, I don't really love that, so I'm going to just take some more fibers and spread them out back here, which is kind of going to be the back. And I'm going to keep them all on this side, and we can even maybe add another little hanky over here. Oh, these are fun. This is some mohair locks, which are actually different from those. And why don't we just trail them all down? Thank you, Kate. I have all these people kind of answering questions for me. So someone said, what kind of mesh do we use? And you could tell some folks that have been with us for a while because they know all our products. Thank you so much. Yes, we do sell this mesh. It's a polyester product. I've been using the same product for at least 15 years, and I really like it. So it's just what I like to use. Hankies are kind of a fun, slimy thing. I'm going to cut this one. You can cut them as well. You don't have to use them in their full length. So cut them how you like them. And you can also stretch them really far. There's a video somewhere in our videos where when Kate Kaprowski was here, we stretched one halfway across the room, 2 people. It was really wild and fun. So You can stretch these really far and use them to kind of anchor things down. I'm going to let it just stretch barely over here. We just want to add some texture to the back and color and break it up. Okay, so this is all I'm going to add. Ray says she's been watching. Thank you all so much for joining in. And you know, really what I want to do with this whole series is just encourage you to experiment, have fun. You know, making doll things are so low risk. I got started with dolls, and truthfully, I'm still just having fun and learning what I want to learn every year, learning something new. So I hope you do too. Now, you don't have to rub this all to death. We're going to roll, and rolling, especially something small, is just so easy. So here's how I like to do that. I'm going to start rolling side to side first. We're going to shrink it this way. I'm stuck to a hanky over here. Okay. We're going to roll side to side this way first. So we have our project all encased in the mesh, and we're going to wrap this, and I'm going to use the short end of my super bubble and roll that up around it too. This is thin, so you can roll it fairly tightly. When you have a great big project, as you progress and work bigger and bigger, what you'll learn is that your first rolls are a little bit looser. The first time you roll your project, it's a little bit loose, and then as you felt it more, as the fibers shrink more and get closer and closer together, you can roll it tighter and you can use more strength in your rolling and pressing. I use the quilt square because it just kind of helps hold it all together. And then on something this small, rather than tie, just use rubber bands and kind of latch those sides down. If you have some extra like this, fold it in and latch it down too. It helps keep it from scooting out. This is how I roll something really, really small, and I'm sorry you'll have to sit through it, but here we go. I'm going to roll 25 times and then give it a quarter turn on its axis. We're going to roll 100 times from each side. Here we go, real fast. And so load up your questions while I'm rolling, because this is like downtime. So notice that's like a rock and roll, and then I'm going to give it a quarter turn, and again, 25. So someone says, can you use the palm washboards instead of this? Yes, you can. The palm washboards I have are a little bit big for this project, but I think you're going to be surprised at how fast this felts up and just how easy it is. I think that was 100, but I was reading comments. So someone asked about this this hanky being used. The ones we sell in the shop are solid dyed. This one I dyed myself, and I just dyed with the Jacquard acid dyes. I like to use a variety of dyes when I dye. So dyeing hankies is very time consuming and tedious because they really resist water. So that's why we don't sell the variegated ones. Okay, so here's my little project. It's already, you know, nice and snug up against the resist. We're just going to switch it around and roll from the other side. But the first thing I like to do is peel back my mesh. The hankies will stick to your hands, and it also wants to stick to the mesh. So this is the side I rolled from. I'll just keep that in my mind. I like to peel back the mesh so that the fiber is not sticking to the mesh. And we rolled on that side from that edge. There is the edge we rolled from. I'm going to roll on this side from this edge. All my work stuff is too close to my table. I keep getting it on here. So roll it again. And again on the short side of our super bubble. So someone says, I missed Sis's question, but someone says, can you let the project dry and go back and wet it again and continue working on it? Absolutely. You can let a project sit overnight or a couple of days. I wouldn't let it sit and get moldy. You know, don't let it sit for more than 2 days unless you do let it dry out. But when you do go back to it, make sure you wet it again and soap it again if you need to. Now, this water I'm using is not even warm anymore, for those of you who are curious. When you're felting with, you know, just fiber and not silk fabric, you can felt, oh, I lost my rubber band. You can felt with hot water, but you can also just felt with cold water, room temperature water. Linda, yes. Linda asked, is this wrapped in just a little cotton square? Yes, this is just a little quilting square. I always use them for rolling in. You can use a big sheet if you're making something larger, or you could use, you know, thin sheet of plastic. When you're, even in this case, you can use a thin sheet of plastic instead of mesh, which some people prefer. I like the fabric, especially on something small, because it actually lets the water pass through. But when we felted our big garments, we used basically a grippy bubble wrap as the pattern resist and plastic sheeting on top. A layer of plastic sheeting instead of the mesh on each side. Okay. I feel like I missed a question somewhere. If you use merino top, do you have to roll more? Maria, I would say that these bats really do felt up very fast, and I think merino top does take a little bit longer. But you just have to experiment with that. Just experiment and see, you know, how you like it. Okay, so this is my thin little piece. It's kind of coming together. We've only rolled from 2 sides, and now we need to go down these ends. I just like to make sure I'm not sticking to the mesh, and I at least leave the mesh on and until I've gone probably down at least 3 or 4 sides, just so that my bamboo doesn't tear up these delicate fibers. That's what I want to avoid. Is the bamboo is kind of aggressive and it kind of can dig into things. So we went side to side, and now we're going to go top down. So Terry says that due to medical conditions, she can't roll with her hands and she rolls with her feet. And yes, I know someone who doesn't even really have use of her hands, and she felt 100% with her feet. So do what works for you, that's for sure. And that's definitely an option. So Sharon says that her grippy shelf liner gets slippery as it gets wet, and is she using too much soap or water? You know what, Sharon? I have bought some stuff like at the grocery store that's different than this. It's not quite as thick, and it scooted all over the place and drove me crazy. So see if there might be something that's a little thicker and a little spongier that you can work with, even if it's like the stuff they use under a carpet grippy. That's definitely an option too. Kate says when her shoulder gets bad, she uses child labor instead of rolling. Good idea. If you have a family member who can help you, definitely work them into the mix if you can. Now, some people would felt in the dryer, so they wouldn't use the mesh. They would wet their project all up like this and sandwich it in plastic. And instead of the bamboo in the middle, they would put a wet towel, and they would wrap the outside with the plastic too, and then throw this whole thing and let it bang around in the dryer. not with heat, just with air. I kind of like a little more control than that, but it is an option. You could felt in the dryer. Okay, so here's our little piece. It's starting to see these little wrinkles here. It's starting to bind up on our resist. It's starting to buckle, which is great. It means it's shrinking more than the resist. And what I'm going to do is just take it one more time from this direction. I'm going to take off my bottom piece of mesh. And someone had asked earlier about water. Notice that there's a little water in my tray, but it's kind of away from my project. And if your project feels too wet, you can blot that up. And if this feels too wet, you can even just blot a little bit of water out of this at this stage, just so that it doesn't feel soupy. And we're going to roll one more time from the bottom edge and then check it, probably take it off after that. So what do y'all think? This would be a little dress or a vest? We're going to have to decide, I guess. I don't know who it's for yet. I don't know who's going to wear it. So we're making doll clothes. We started out by looking at just a variety of little patterns. And now that we've made this, once we finish, I'll bring back the little underwear template so we can talk just a little bit about pants. What questions do you all have at this point? And let me see just a heart or a thumbs up if this is helpful so far. Are you learning something that you feel like you can use on your own dolls? You are? Okay, good. That's nice. Notice as we're rolling that this is round, and I'm actually able to roll it back and forth. Something that I see when people are just starting with this is they might kind of go like this, or they might go like this. You want to actually get a little bit of roll, and that's why we do the quarter turns, so that each time we give a quarter turn, we know that all surfaces of our little piece are hitting that table down below at some point. And also notice how my hands are spread out. When I learned to felt, I was told that you had to be able to have the entire project within your hands. Of course, I know that's not true now, but my habit is to, touch as much of the project as I can when I'm rolling as possible. I'm not leaning into it with my forearms. This is a little piece. It's gonna felt up really fast. Oh, Joanne says she's actually felting along, and Sharon says, I wish humans' clothes were just as easy. Oh yeah, I know, because then we'd all be walking around in our felted garments all the time. Okay, so I'm probably gonna get rid of a few of these things on our work surface. Let me take this guy out, and let's look at our little dress here. So one of the things we like to see is that the felt is shrinking up on the resist. You can see it's already shrunk up from the bottom a little bit, and we can actually pinch it and it comes up as its own little fabric. We call this tenting, and when the fabric will tent, meaning you're not pulling it apart with your fingers, you know that you're at least at the soft felt stage. We can take it off our resist now. And one of the things I didn't mention, but I would like to, as we wrapped around, remember we used our mesh to hug the resist, and I didn't even rub a bunch. We rolled from side to side first, and that really helped the edges bind to the resist and not scooch off and felt to themselves. That's called a seam if it scooches off the resist and felts to itself. So one benefit of rolling in the beginning is you kind of get it hugging. If you're going to use a palm washboard or your hands instead of the rolling to start, just remember to roll to the center, and if you watched our wet felting over resist video for making like a little vessel, that is just a technique that I encourage you to stick with. So a couple of our neps will come off, and I'm totally okay with that. And where you have just kind of the ridge where it hugged the resist, you can actually stretch it a little bit and put your hand back on your soap if you can find your soap and just felt that surface. Sharon says, this makes me want to make a skirt for me. You know, it's so fun, and I really had so much fun in Charity's class, and I even got over a few of my own insecurities, if you will, of, you know, being afraid to. I made a few tunics, as you know, but I really wanted to make like my dream skirt, which I did, and I can't say enough for, you know, going for it. Okay, so all I did was kind of smooth out the sides, and I do want to shrink it a little bit more. And for those of you who are brand new and you hear lots of terms about felting and such, we have a soft felt here, and what we want to do is just further shrink the fabric, and that's actually called fulling. So when people have a knitted item and they throw it in the washing machine, that's considered fulling. And when you're once you're at the soft felt stage and you get your fibers to bind, then that's considered felting, soft felt. And the next stage of felt making is fulling, where we further shrink the fibers down. And doing this now too will give us an opportunity to kind of let the bottom maybe be a little more organic. And I'm just rolling it on itself, going back to the side to side. Like I said, I didn't really make this for some body, but I think I cut this kind of off my dolly dress pattern. I'll hold them up before we finish so you can see. Oh, you all are so sweet. I'm glad you like these colors. Like, you can't go wrong with like a sort of lagoony blue and a limey green and a little brown. You can't go wrong. You can't. Okay, we've gone side to side a little bit. We do need to kind of cut sleeve holes or neck holes at some point. Who's this going to be for? I wonder if I have a body ready. Now that I made this dress, before I do, I'll cut it with y'all so we can, let me just see if I can dig out a body. You can do this, you know, you can work these edges when you don't know where to cut it yet. You can get them felted a little bit more before you cut it, and that is ideal because things tend to stretch out of shape a bit after you cut them. Like, as soon as you cut something, the fiber is going to pull apart, and I'll show that to you on the underwear again. So you want it to kind of be ready before you cut those armholes and those neck holes. Go ahead and felt it a really good degree. If we want a ruffly skirt, do we just felt from the bottom up like finger width columns to change the drape? Would we just felt from the bottom up like finger width columns? If you want this to be a little more roughly, you can start to pull, you know, you can start to pull and tug, and you might even start to peak it at some points. Like, you might start to peak it and pull on some of those points. There's a way to do it, but short of teaching something I just learned from a master felt maker, I would say, you know, play with that, and you want to leave enough room so that when you go to put it on your doll, it will gather, kind of like on my little witchy. So make the skirt full enough that you can kind of gather it in, and you can even stitch it in at the waist there once you put it on your doll. Digging out a body. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to go into my magic closet and dig out a body, and then I'm going to grab the pants also. So y'all bear with me just for a second, and then we're going to finish cutting this. So I don't know, I'm back. I don't know. I think this is a little long for this little girl who the other little fairy dress was made for. This is a little big for her, and it looks like I can't find one of the other bodies that's kind of in a ready state. But this would be a nice long dress for her, and it's a little big up here because she's very narrow shouldered. So let me see if I have one more doll. This is a skinny doll, but the body could get fleshed out later, and this might be a little more fitting. So this is just a doll in the kind of in the rough stages, but this would be a little bit closer for this length. So here's what I would do. I would go ahead and shrink this part in just a little bit before we cut it, and you can kind of go in at each corner. This sort of pinch and roll is called like spot fulling. It's a way of spot fulling. So where someone earlier said, you know, one of the things you can do to shrink something is how you roll. The fiber likes to shrink in the direction that you're rubbing it, but also it likes to shrink in its staple direction. So there's a few things that affect that. But when you get to this stage, you can absolutely shrink something more by just focusing on that area. Yeah, someone says it would make a nice cloak. You could cut it open to make a long duster or a tunic. That's exactly right, and that's what I wanted to show you, is that this could be, if you made it shorter, could be a vest for a doll. If you cut the neck hole and you cut the sleeves out, it could be a vest. It could be a skirt on a doll. It could be a sleeveless dress. Someone said a cloak. Absolutely right. So there's so many directions you can take it, and that doesn't have to be the front and not the back. You could change it up and work this a little more now and reshape it. You could cut that whole neck hole out. I think I like this maybe for the back. So, any votes on how I cut it right now? Now's the time. Use your super sharp scissors. And as someone said, as soon as you cut, know that it's going to stretch more. You can just make little tiny snips. And I think what I'd like to do, y'all have so many ideas. You have so many ideas, I don't know what to do. So it could be a vest. I think for this doll, for it to be, I'm waiting to see, head and arm cuts. Short romper. Okay, so let's just start there with the head and arm cuts. So the first thing I'm going to do is the head hole, and then you can see that this almost now just fits these shoulders. So this would make a really wide dress, and she's not wide. This doll is not wide at this point, but keep in mind that your doll eventually, before I cut those holes, would be wider. Like, look at this doll here. This doll is already built out and much wider. So I'm going to cut these armholes, but just keep that in mind, that the doll can fill it out, and this is just the idea of a doll right here. So the first thing is I like to find where is that exact middle for the head, and then just make a tiny snip so you know where it is. And then we'll just cut a tiny little hole. Depends on how high you want it. You may want it to be a low neck. Okay, I just cut like a tiny little hole, and then we're going to felt that a little bit. Tunic, like everyone has different ideas. So for now, I'll start it out as a dress, and then we could cut it into a vest. Maybe I'll just do that just for fun. We'll just do both, because I didn't plan this for anybody. Okay, so you want to felt the edges. It kind of seals them down, and felt by its nature doesn't fray, but it is more expanded those layers are more expanded when you first just cut them. So this kind of helps just taper those edges. And then when you do the armholes, she needs it to come over a little bit. Cut them at the same time if you can, or at least make, you know, the suggestion of where they are. If you have something else that already works or you know it, then you can, you know, hold it up to it and use that as a model. I'm just going to cut out a little tiny bit here for her arms. I'm going to cut one and then the other. So just to give you a look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let it come over the shoulder, and then I'm going to cut a little armhole like right there, there to there. So right in the middle of that, I'm going to cut a little hole, snip, and then I'm going to come on either side of that. It's probably too narrow, but before you expand it, depends on how fitted you want it on your doll, and you can try it on your doll, but before you expand it, cut the other one, because expanding it or stretching it out is going to change it. Can you cut the holes larger after it's dried? Absolutely. I mean, it's a little better to cut it after it's a little more dry because it's going to stretch less. But for the sake of today, we don't really have time to do that. So use the one that you made previously as your guide, just so they kind of match. And I'm just going to felt these two down, felt these two a little bit, and then we'll slip our dolly arms in them because thank you. I'm glad you guys liked the dress we made together. You all are part of this making. So notice how much, you know, those holes are going to expand, and the shoulders, which are very pointed, can be worked, you know, down a little bit. And the dress will be a little bit brighter once it's not laden with soap. But while it's in this stage, let's just go ahead and put it on our dolly and see what we think, because you're going to have lots of room to make decisions with your own dress. So is this maybe this is the back now? I like this side better. I don't know. I'll make it the front. What do y'all think? Front, back. I think this is the front. Okay, here we go. I'm going to put it on the dolly. So big wiry arms all the way up. And have a great big head wire, which I have not squeezed down. Here it is. Oh, that's an arm. Here we go. And again, this is why I like to put the heads on last. It really helps you kind of get something to be on your doll that's a little more fitted, that won't need a zipper, won't need buttons. I mean, of course, buttons and zippers are really fun to add, but you can do all kinds of layering fun here. So you see how this same pattern could be a skirt only, could be a vest, could be a tunic, or it could be a sleeveless dress. Darlene says, how do you make sleeves? And so now's a good time to jump back to this. So let me remove my tray and let's go back to what we were looking at earlier. And now that we've made something together over a resist, I think it's going to make a little more sense for you. So let me pull this away and we'll bring back the other things that we worked on. So here we go. And thanks for being here, everybody, sticking it out for this this duration. I know it's kind of slow to get through all this, although this is a pretty fast felting project that we did together. Here's a few templates to look at. Okay, so the difference between what we just made, which is a skirt, or a tunic or a dress, a sleeveless dress. And this is about this right here. Kind of about that. So this is the pattern that we just made. This is this red dress in the back. This is this red dress. And so the difference is, instead of wrapping around here, we let the wool trail down to the sleeves, and we have to wrap the wool up in these little narrows. And if you're brand new to felting, I suggest start with something a little more simple. One, like a flat piece to start, like we talked about in the beginning. Two, once you can make a piece of felt with integrity, try and learn to felt over resist. And then these little narrow areas are just going to be easier with a short fiber and a little more experience, so that you know how to handle the fiber, and that's sort of second nature by that time. Do you leave it on the body while I finish making the doll? So this one I wouldn't. This one I would finish fleshing out the body of the doll, how as full as I want her, and I might then put it back on before I finish the arms, depending just on how well it's going to be fitted. But it's an option to put your arms on last so that they don't get too banged up. And I'm trying to read y'all's questions. And I did record earlier this part for doing the body, and then we'll capture this session back too, that we did here together, put it all together. For someone who's doing pants, this is how I made the underwear for my for this little girl. And remember that if you can make a skirt that fits, then you can make pants that fit. This is just for her little undies. For those of you who joined us late, she's got on like a full little bodysuit under there. And try and just make a casual pair of like underpants first and see if you can get your sizing right with the expansion. I'm going to sew these down like little bloomers. And I'm looking for more questions. Kate has a question on the witch, and Marjolaine wants to see the little trousers. Oh, great. Joanne was felting along with us and she made a little vest. That's awesome. I'm going to take this dress off my doll so that I can finish her underwear. And I'm probably going to do all the embellishments on the dress off her body, so that it's just a little bit easier to work with. And I brought for you the smallest pair of pants I ever wet felted. And they are on this little guy right here. He is a polymer doll, and I've only ever made a couple of polymer dolls. It was just a little foray into making polymer dolls, and I learned a lot from them. It taught me some of the things that I do for needle felted dolls. I really liked it. I thought it was kind of, in some ways, easier than needle felting, but I love fiber so much that I just kind of couldn't give it up. And so I made little tiny pants for him. And what was the real challenge was the legs were too narrow for his feet to get through. And I wanted to bring him in so that you all could think about that. You know, you don't want the legs to get so narrow that the feet won't fit. For my little granny doll here, I was able to bend her feet forward, and that may be an option too. But his feet are fixed, of course. And they were too big for him, so I just, used little tiny buttons to kind of fix them on him. And he's called the storyteller. His little cloak, he tells stories about the stuff he's gathered along his travels. Whatever, he lives at my house and holds, he kind of holds this great big acorn, and he's just something that hangs around as just a reminder, I guess, of my own creative exploration. So that was my share of the tiny little pants that I made. Oh, Marceline makes polymer characters too. That's so sweet and fun. Okay, so Kate asked about the witch. Let's bring her back one more time and tell me your questions. Oh, about the witch. So about the witch is I needle felted on her arm, just like we learned, with Santa or whomever, just like you do with the skin tone. Wrap that around her arm as you felt, and then I just needle felted on a little bit bigger wrist wrist fiber. This right here is just a pre-felt, and I don't really use pre-felt for clothing for this reason. You can see how loose it is. So if your dolls are going to get handled at all, I would wet felt the pre-felt before I needle felted it on, at least this particular pre-felt that we sell now, because it really is so loose and it wouldn't hold up as a skirt or anything like that. So let me know any other questions you have on this. I'm trying to see your questions. Okay. I don't see any more questions popping up just now. So if you feel like you learned something new, I would love to see maybe what that was. I'll turn the camera back up now and come up here with you all. If you feel like you learned something new, I would love to know what that was. Maybe like sometimes there's just one little thing that you get out of a particular class, one little tidbit, one little piece. And I know this has been quite a long series, and I just appreciate so many of you going the whole distance with me. I know some of you are going to be felting your dolls from start to finish soon, and you haven't started at all. And then other people are like done, almost done, because you felted along with me the entire way, and that's super fun too. Here is, some people want to know how to wet felting a hat. Wet felting a hat is just like we did with the little tunic. It's just that you're going to have to play with the shapes. So the witch's hat, if you go back to the beginning of this video, I showed the little triangle that I felted her hat on. When you measure the body, just like when you measure the head, just like we measured the body, you're going to want to measure the largest part of the head so that you account for the shrinkage around where you want it to fit, depending on how you want it to fit on the doll. So when I made her hat, I measured for the biggest part of her head, I measured around here. That's where I needed it to be big. And then I cut her ear holes and put the hat on her head. It's not needle felted on there. It would be removable, but I intentionally wanted her ears sticking out. So play with some different hat shapes. This would just be like the shape of the beanie goes like here, if you will, and then I added the little tabs and the little swoop-de-doo. But when you measure the head, go around here and account for your shrinkage. And you have to learn, it's really important when you first start to wet felt is to learn that you need to calculate shrinkage. It's going to be different depending on the type of fiber you use, how much fiber you use, how much you felt, the direction you lay the fibers. So the best thing to do is to make a test square to start using the same fibers, the same number of layers that you plan to use in your finished project, and measure. So start with a 10 by 10 square or an 8 by 8 square. Use exactly the same fibers, exactly the same number of layers, exactly the same direction, and then measure that shrinkage. If you're going to wet felt over resist, then make a little circle. Measure the shrinkage and then use that. And if you don't want to do that, well then wing it, and that'll be your test piece. If it doesn't fit, then you can make adjustments after. And that's kind of the key, is if you're not willing to make an actual test piece, then the first piece you make will be the test piece. Cool. Oh, great. So I'm so glad that you all have joined along with me. It's just been such my pleasure. The next felt along will be a cobweb scarf. I'm still trying to decide whether to do it on a Friday or a Saturday, and I'm thinking that it'll be after the upcoming holiday weekend here in the US in September. So towards the end, first Monday in September. Yeah, so it's either going to be the first, I'll see. I'll let y'all know, but we'll wet felt the cobweb scarf together. Kate says for the larger dolls, to use a different gauge wire for the skeleton. Yes, add more wire, Kate. So on the bigger dolls, use the thicker wire and make sure that your structure, will hold its position that you want without wool on the body, because wool is heavy. The wool will help you shape it to some degree, but you don't want it to be too flimsy. It's harder to make tall dolls stand. We can balance ourselves and dolls can't, but definitely I use thicker wire on the bigger dolls. I use the heavier gauge wire. Okay, just looking for any last questions before we sign off. Can you share any advice on attaching the head? I did attach the head on the last episode, and so just to show that again, let me grab my lady. We won't have time to do it now, but this is my suggestion. Is first off, you want this to not be too long. You only want this to be as long as you want the neck to be. If it's too long, snip it and curl it down so that the pokey end is down and you have it shorter. The second thing is, when you make your doll head, leave a little bit of fluff at the bottom so that you can hide the neck joint. I find it much easier than having the wool terminate underneath the chin. You're going to insert these wires into the neck wire, and then you're just going to wrap them around. So watch the last video. We do it towards the end, and if you watch it on YouTube, there's jump to points. So on YouTube, click show more, and beneath that you will see the sections listed out along with times next to them. So you can jump to needle felting the pants, needle felting toes, and attaching the head as well. But you can see how we wrap it around. You're just going to wrap one wire one direction, the other wire another direction, cut it off, and cover it with wool, just kind of like you did on the arm joins. It's so easy. So have fun with that. And yes, what about Stash's hat? I didn't show how to make Stash's hat. This was really a labor of love, and all I can tell you is I can tell you how I did it, and a couple of people have emulated his hat already. But for Stash's hat, I basically made wet felted sheets of our MC1 batting in willow, big pieces of fabric, soft felted, and then I cut a bajillion triangles out, and I needle felted it, in concentric circles, starting with framing the face. So I started at the face and then just needle felted each little circle, each little triangle on there. So if you can needle felt fabric, cut out circles, if you can wet felt fabric, cut out triangles, and needle felt, just the edges, well then you can make Stash's acorn hat. Yep, pretty easy. Oh, I'm so glad you all enjoyed it. I really am. I'm so glad. I really appreciate all of your feedback and all of your encouragement. I'm glad that it's been fun for you. I'm glad if it's been helpful. I look forward to seeing your dolls. And here's the last thing I want to ask. When you finish your doll, take like a rock star picture of it. Take it out. Don't put it on the back of the couch, Put it out in the yard. Take it in natural daylight. Check out our free tutorial on photographing your fiber art. Take a great picture of it somewhere without a bunch of stuff in the background, and email it to us at friends@livingfelt.com with doll felt along pics in the subject line, so that we can create an album of everyone's dolls all together, and tell us something interesting about it. I wish that we had a way that you could all add your dolls to our Facebook albums, and I don't know why that's not possible, but short of that, email your final picture of your doll to friends@livingfelt.com. Have it say doll felt along pics in the subject line, and tell us anything about what was the best part for you, what you learned, what you discovered about yourself. This is really a personal journey for everybody, and hopefully I hope that you find how talented you are, how amazing you are, how brilliant you are in these simple little projects of bringing these fun little characters of your own creativity to life. And it's just been my pleasure. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, whatever you do, and I'll be watching for your #DollFeltAlong pictures around the web as we go. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate you more than I can say. Bye-bye.